Well, welcome to a special episode of See Hear Love. And I love to feature women who are doing brave and courageous things. Women like you and me, women who get nervous being on a podcast, women who have stayed at home supporting their family and now are doing something completely different than they would have ever thought in this stage of their life. Don't you just love that? And I love as women, we go through different seasons of our life. And it feels like we're like 7 different women. If we think about when we started off as a teenager, and if you're 50, 60, 70, it feels like we've lived like 7 lives. And, we're changing and opportunities come our way. And I guess the big question is, will you take the step to do something that terrifies you, that you feel completely ill-equipped to do? Will you trust God to lead you and guide you? Well, this week, my guest is a very special guest and special friend, Laura Ross. She's also the founder of Seeds, which she'll talk more about in our conversation. So welcome, Laura, to See Hear Love.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So this is going to be really a wonderful and I think really great conversation for you and I, because we're friends. And sometimes, Laura, with friends, you can kind of chat about things you're doing, but you don't get kind of like a focused, honed in conversation about actually what you're really doing. Like, we have mutual friends, we go out for dinner, we have girls, weekends away and all that, but sometimes we don't have this kind of moment. So I'm really looking forward, Laura, to this because it's all about you.
Great. I love that.
I know. That's why I said it. I'm like, yeah. She'll be like, no, not so good.
But thank you. I still appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Oh, boy.
All right. Well, and you know what? Let's tell our listeners and viewers, like, how we met in that random way. Because to this day, when I share this story, people are like, really? So tell your side, and then I'll tell my side and fill in. But this is, okay, listeners and viewers, this is seriously how Laura and I met. And it's kind of wild and funny all at the same time. But Laura, what's your side of that story?
And so my side of the story would be that I was on Facebook one day, and a mutual friend of ours had posted that this company called See Hear Love was looking for a farm to possibly be the host of the opening of their show. And I was like, oh, our place looks pretty good right now. For whatever reason, we had cleaned it all up. Maybe there was a wedding or something. I forget what. I was like, oh, our place looks pretty good. So I'll send her a few pictures. So I did that. And then you connected with me. You're like, yeah, I think it could be good. And then you brought a whole team of people over. And that was the first time we actually met. It's you bringing your entire cast, really, and extras of all the people that were recording to come over. And so that was the first, which was great. It was great, as always, to spend time with you and to meet you, first of all, and to go forward from there.
You're exactly right. We put out a call, like, we need this farmhouse for our show opener. And I was looking for this white farmhouse and a very specific look. Because if kind of, Chip and Joanna Gaines' Magnolia Farmhouse vibe, which I was like watching on like TV and all of that. And then all these people sent pictures of their farmhouses, which weren't white, which some of them weren't even farmhouses. They were like brick homes in suburbia. I'm not even joking. No offense to the people who sent me pictures of their suburbia home. Thank you so much. But when I put out the call for a white farmhouse, and then I remember you sent those in, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. And we went, and I think, were you gardening, but you had to run out? Like, you literally were gardening, bye, see ya, thanks, go. And then you kind of left the house, so trusting to us.
Yes, I did. I have to run out to actually meet with one of my survivors, to be honest. Yeah. We'll get into that later.
Yeah. But I was like, and the crew was like, did she just leave you her house? I'm like, I think so. And then I think somebody said, what's in her fridge?
Yeah. And you could have gone. You could have walked right in.
Shoot, we should have, because I was like, oh, no, guys, no, no.
No,
Well,
no, I
maybe.
don't know her that
No,
well.
no, exactly. And then because of
Oh,
that connection, then we found out that we had mutual friends.
yeah,
And then we started having these like girls' dinners together and girls'
yeah.
times away. And you think like, people always ask like, how do women get to know each other? Especially later in life. A lot of women will say to me, Laura, like, I can't find friends at this age or stage. It's hard for me to connect with women later. Like usually you find friends that are like your teenage friends or college friends, and then those become your friends. But like we became friends, kind of later in life in that way.
Yeah,
And just through that. And then we kind of just sort of like were really intentional about it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So, and I
you know?
appreciate your intentionality in bringing people
Mm.
together. You are very good at that.
Thank you. Well, it's easy when it's people like you, and it was meant to be, because it's been really
Um,
a fun journey. Even just in the past couple of years, just seeing where you're at. So let's get. I know people are like, okay, so who are you, Laura? So maybe just give a bit of personal background, because I think your background of who you are kind of sets the stage to now where you are. Do you know what I mean? What we said. So maybe some personal background, what
Sure.
you do, what you're doing, and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, sure. Um, yeah. So the funny thing is, I am just this average person who, when I grew up on a farm outside of Cornwall on Paragon Road. And yeah, I never really thought I was anything special. I still don't think I'm anything special, to be honest. um, but I grew up as a pastor's kid / farmer's kid. And my dad was part-time pastoring. And then he went into full-time farming. So that's really how I spent my first 16 years, was really growing up on a farm. And then when I was 16, he decided he'd go full-time into the pastorate again, and which brought us to this area. So we moved to Sheffield, which is just outside of Cambridge, and a small village there. And so brought us to this area, and yeah, I just started making friends here. And then I went off to Briarcrest Bible College, and out in Saskatchewan, and did that I was supposed to go for 2 years. And between my 2 years in my summertime, I went tree planting and out in BC, and really had a crisis of faith, I would call it, when I was there. And I decided that I was going to leave Bible college because I wanted to find God again. I know it sounds sort of funny to wonder why someone would have to leave Bible college to do that, but I was so busy with 21 hours of school. I was on the volleyball team. I was on the missions committee, and I wasn't making time for God. So 3 weeks into my second semester, I left on the advisement of a few people, a few good friends. And then 4 days later, when I returned back to Cambridge, I met my husband. So God has plans, far above ours. And that didn't obviously go perfectly, but that was an introduction to my husband. And then where God took that from there, that was his plan. So we got married in 1996 and had 5 kids over the years. And yeah, we were living a very lovely life, I will say.
Very.
And thank God.
And then God. I want to
And
go back to
thank
that.
God.
I think this is fascinating, because I felt the same way, Laura, in Bible college. And I love the Bible college I went to. But for me, there was a challenge, because it felt like I was doing the school and doing the work, trying to get to know God, but I actually was missing on the relationship with Jesus. And I mean, I stayed through, but I remember I had to take a moment to say, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm doing the work, but I actually don't know him. Like, it feels like I'm just doing it to get this grade, but I don't actually have any relationship. I didn't know him. I didn't know him well. And so, my Bible college experience was really more about the community that I met there, women who are so not like me, who we somehow were able to say, let's focus on God and not the differences. And some of these girlfriends are like, have been my best friends for the past like 27 years. And they're so opposite, but it's like Jesus kind of put us together, you know, in that place. But
Yeah.
I hear you. I hear that kind of crisis of faith challenge. And what was the crisis of faith? Like, what was it? Was there something about God, or was it the systems, or what was it?
I think it was sort of like you, was making your faith your own. And because I had grown up in a pastor's family, right? And so all my life I've been hearing about God, hearing about Jesus. And there were definitely moments along the path that God sort of stuck like an anchor in and said, this is what you're going to learn from, and you're going to go forward from here. And there were definitely times like that. Like when I came to Christ at an early age, and out of fear mostly. And then when I was 12 at a camp, I just realized then how much God actually loved me. And so those kind of moments, and then as a teenager, just realizing, okay, what do I want with my relationship with God? And what does that look like? Is it going to be surface? And I'm like, I don't do surface very well. It's got to be in depth. And so it was that time of just looking all around me at so-called, I mean, I hate to sound judgmental, but so-called Christians that didn't look any different than the world. And I'm like, I don't want that. I want to look different, not to the extent that people are like scared, but
exactly, right.
Right. But more to the like, wow, okay, there's something different about her. What is it that makes her different? So that kind of thing, like being in the world, but still not of the world, and not having a mindset of the world. And I feel like God has really sort of honed that over and over and over again in my life, which can make me feel like I stand on the outside, to be honest, a fair bit. Because I feel very different inside when I am surrounded by Christians who aren't as maybe, I don't know, in depth, but God has also taught me a lot about grace. Because I mean, even when in Bible college, they used to call me the Holy Spirit because I was like so judgmental and so black and white. And so after this time of sort of crisis of faith, I was like, wow, there's actually a lot of gray areas in life that don't have black and white answers for people. So, and that was sort of, the big impetus that spurred me on to sort of where I am today.
That is so good. You know, I think that's for a lot of us that have been following Jesus for a long time, or it could be for people that are right now who are like, there are a lot of gray areas. Like the scriptures are mysterious. The people are mysterious. God is, you know, you think one thing about him and then something changes, or you have questions about why this didn't happen or this didn't happen. And there are gray areas. And so I think the challenge for us is that we're people who want the answer. We want exactly why. I want it to resolve. I want to know exactly why this happened. I want to know the timeline. And
put it's in a little box, please.
Put in a box, and then I just nice and organized and ready to go. Well, the thing though is that when you look through scriptures, it's like hope and faith, like hope and faith. Like faith, it's like, well, you can't, you know, you have to have faith in the things that you cannot see. And so then will you trust God in the things you don't know and don't see? And that drives someone like me crazy.
Yes.
Because
same.
I want to see it, I want to know it, I want to touch it, I want to feel it, I want the proof, I want it. And yet there is so much gray and mystery, which I think is so wise of God, because of course if we knew everything, you know, obviously, but I mean, I think I know that drives people crazy. Like they want to know. So I think that's a really good reminder. And even for your own personal story about the gray area, like living in that space, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's annoying though. Sometimes.
Is it
ever?
ever?
Let's just be honest.
Yeah. And I like even just today, it was annoying. I'm like, okay. so, so yeah, I'm still living in that processing all the gray areas and
Yeah.
processing, who God is.
Yeah. And living in the
Good.
tension of it, because
Yeah.
even just in so many questions of, people are like, why God? Why weren't you there? Why didn't you save
Yeah.
me? Why didn't you protect me? Why did she have to pass away so young? And it's like,
Yeah.
we don't have the answers for it. We don't,
Yeah.
but do
That's
we
right.
trust God? Do we remain faithful? Do we, as people who follow Jesus, then love more and serve more and care more? I think that's the call. I think in a lot of the gray areas, God's like, okay, well, the default would be love. And the
Yes.
default would be, like kind of keep going,
Yeah.
keep loving, keep serving,
Yes.
because you won't know the answers
That's
until the
exactly
end.
it. That's
So
exactly it.
stop stressing about it because you won't know,
Just
It's like,
stop
okay,
stressing.
yeah, stop stressing. Thanks, God. That's going to be our motto for the show title. Be like, stop stressing, dash God.
God's got
Thank
this.
you. Yeah, God. So let's go back to, you said you got married, you have 5 kids, which is like, wow, that's a huge accomplishment. I know that you do incredible baking. So I know you started that in that.
Yep.
And so you have this life. So just quickly paint a picture. So you're on this farm, you have 5 kids, you're baking. Like it sounds very
Idyllic.
lovely, idyllic, and lovely and beautiful.
Yes. Beautiful. Exactly. All of this. Okay. So I'll back up a little bit to 2012. And my husband comes home one day. So we had all 5 kids at this point, and we had built a retirement home when our second one came along. And like retirement home, like we built it from the ground up. We researched, we did everything. And then in 2000, and we lived there. We moved in 2001. So 11 years goes by, right? And my oldest is in school. The kids are, I'm trying to think at that point, forgive me if my math is a little off, if all my kids were in school, or just the youngest ones were going into school. And great school. I had just started getting really involved in the community, and life was great. And honestly, it was really good. And then my husband comes home one day and he says, so like I heard this farm is for sale. And I'm like, so like we built our retirement home. Like I totally dismissed it. And then 2 days later, he comes back and he says, so I booked an appointment to see this farm. And I'm like, what? What are you thinking? I love my husband dearly, but sometimes our thought patterns just are not on the same level at all. And anyway, so I'm like, what? Fine. Okay, we'll go see this farm.
Yep.
So went to see this farm, and driving in, like it was funny because the things that stick out in my head is the fact that I passed this county sign, and I'm like, it's out of our county. Like I can't keep my kids in the same school. Like, okay. And we drive up the driveway, and there's this tiny little building with a pavement walkway that went like right on the main floor. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. My dad's in a wheelchair, and he is just right on the level of the driveway. And so there's no steps, there's no ramps, there's no nothing that he would need in this little house. And then we come up to the back of the house, and it's always the little things I find that God can speak the loudest in. And so we walk in the back door, and remember I said we had 5 kids, and there's like, it's a massive entryway at the back door, and there's 5 cupboards. And for me, I'm just like, really? Yeah, God speaks to me in numbers, and sometimes. So just the fact that there were 5 cabinets for each of my kids to have their own cabinet walking in the house. I'm like, okay. And then there were all kinds of, like, it just went on from there about all the ways that God showed us that this was the place for us. And I'm not saying in any way, I'm not glossing it over, saying it was easy. If, in fact, 2012 was probably the hardest, and 13 was probably the hardest years I've ever lived. Because I find that once you say yes to God, when he is asking you to step out, it's in a lot of big ways. It's not just in one big way, but in a lot of big ways. And I've got like a whole piece of paper with the list of everything that went wrong in 2012 and 2013. And so, yeah, in the midst of that, I did like to bake. And so we did move our family to the farmhouse, and enjoyed like the time with my family. My parents moved into that little house, just 500 feet from us, and which is fantastic. So, and then that gets into the rest of my story, but we can talk about that in a minute.
You know, I love this. I mean, the couple things that you said, like the littlest things, in the littlest things, God speaks in the loudest way. Like that's really, you know, sometimes that's it. Sometimes we think that God's going to do the writing on the wall and the big things.
Yeah.
You know, like, please speak to me loudly in my house, you know, like in a voice that I love, you know, like that either Morgan Freeman or Brad Pitt or whoever else we want, you know, speak to me. And a lot of times, like you said, it's in the little ways. And I think sometimes we miss it, right? Because we're looking for the big answers and obvious things or whatever, we miss that there's always these little kind of like, you know, how like in Taylor Swift songs, there's those eggs that they always do, or in like shows like The Office, they have these eggs, they call it, where it's like funny little things that the writers put in or the actors put in or the singer puts in that connects to something. Yeah. It's like God's doing that all over the place. And we're like, exactly. And I feel like sometimes it's like a fun, like God's dropping these little eggs around and he's like, find them. Open your eyes and find them. This is fun, you know? And it's like, oh, and then we miss it. And he's like, you missed it. That was kind of like something I was saying to you, or something encouraging for you, and you missed it. Like, I love what you just said there, Laura. Like, these littlest things is like the way that God speaks to us the loudest. Yeah. If we're looking and listening, right? Right. Exactly. So how have you honed yourself into that? Because if there's a lot of people who are like looking for the big things, the big answers, the obvious ways of God speaking or answering, how have you kind of like disciplined or focused in onto the little things, or maybe even some of the most powerful ways God speaks to us or shows us?
It's been interesting. It's been, as everything in life, all our learning tends to be built on something else before it. And but there was one thing that, funny enough, Kathy Maid said to me when I got together with her and sharing a bit about what we were doing, and she said, like what you said, it's never this big aha, ta-da moment. Mm-hmm. It's God like pulling back the curtains a little bit and then closing them again, and then pulling them back a little bit more and then closing them, and I think that is really where God pieces our life together so that he gets the glory, so that it's nothing of us saying, oh, I had this great big idea and this is how it all came together. And it's like, well, that could happen. But like, I have a lot of amazing people in my life, and my mentor is one of them. And she's been with me for over 25 years now.
Wow, that's awesome.
And one of the things that she has said is that God, he takes things and he puts them together in ways that that we don't always understand. Like, we think he wants us to go over here, but in reality, he wants us to go over here so that we'll go over here. But we wouldn't get over here if we had gone this direction first. And so the place that we always think we're going to end up, in reality, is so convoluted from where we thought we were going to be. And so it's just been it's been eye-opening as I've been looking for, especially with that kind of mentality, is that thinking is like, okay, God, I really feel like you're calling me to this. I'm going to go in that direction with the understanding of what I have right now. And I'm going to trust that if you have something else beside that, that you will open my eyes to see that. And so it is quite a journey in figuring all those fun things out with God.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay, so lovely life on the farm. You move to the farm, you're 5 kids, you're baking, you're schooling your kids. It's lovely. And I'm assuming you're thinking that maybe this is your life. Like, here we are, the trajectory. Maybe you're questioning, well, when the kids leave, what's going to happen? But here's your life.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we're faced with this entirely different focus, trajectory. You know, what is this? So let's talk about seeds. Let's talk about what caused you to launch it, what it is, and then I've got some really good questions about it. But again, for the women who are listening, going, okay, yeah, I'm tracking. It's here's my life. It all seems good. It's lovely. This is what I'm doing, and then bam, okay,
and then bam, that's right.
Here we are. So let's talk about how we got to the bam. And more about Seeds, because it's a phenomenal organization and what you're doing.
Thank you. So yes, the BAM came with the move to the farm.
Yeah.
And like I was sharing earlier, all those, like, it was a really hard time in our lives, like that long list of things, right? And so in the midst of that, my husband had a very public anxiety attack at church. And to the point that I thought he actually almost had a stroke. Anyways, it was really bad. And so the ambulance is called and they tell him, well, you're not going to get in any sooner if you go by ambulance. So maybe just make an appointment with your family doctor. So he does that. So this is Sunday. So Monday he goes to see his family doctor and his doctor says, well, you had an anxiety attack. Let's have lunch on Wednesday. I'd like to talk to you about something. And he's a little quirky that way. So he could do that. And so Wednesday, my husband goes to lunch with the family doctor, comes back and he's like, I said, so how did lunch go? He's like, well, he said, it was fine. He says, but he asked if we would consider converting our barn that we just bought, like on the farm, into a home for survivors of human trafficking. And I'm like, what is that? What?
Like, we're dealing with a public anxiety attack.
Yeah.
Now.
I know. See the BAM? See the BAM?
Yeah. That's a BAM. That's a BAM.
That was a big it was. And I'm like, what is that? Like, I honestly had never even heard of the issue before, Melinda. Like, I was so, like, living my life with my family and my kids, going to church and all these amazing things. And then, you know, like, God steps in a, well, I'll say now it's a beautiful way, but in a very big way at that time. So, and that was the change. Just that one offhanded comment changed the trajectory of my life, because I started doing research and I'm like, what is human trafficking? And why should I care? And the more research I did, the more I understood, because his initial understanding was that girls were being brought here to Hamilton on containers, like from across the ocean. And I mean, it could happen, but it's not like that, really. Because statistics say that 93% of human trafficking victims in Canada are Canadian girls. And so that's what I was learning. And that's what I was coming to understand. And so did more research and more research and more research, and met people, met with Katarina McLeod, met with Tamia Nagy, met with lots and lots of people who pointed me in the direction of, okay, this is what is going on. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Okay.
And I'm like, okay. And so that initial conversation, that, you know, that thought process of, building a house. And like, okay, do they need a house? And when I first started looking into it, there were only 5 homes all across Canada for survivors of human trafficking. There's lots of shelters for women, which is fantastic. We need those. But human trafficking is so different than oftentimes what brings a woman to a shelter. And like the trauma, the levels, the depth of trauma is just so deep that there needs to be sort of in-depth healing and in-depth understanding of the issue. So that's sort of that's sort of what launched the idea for having a home for survivors. And so then SEEDS, which stands for Supporting Every Eve's Daughter Safely. And because I've got this gardening background, being on a farm, and there's so many biblical references to seeds too, that a girlfriend and I were chatting about it at her kitchen table the one day, and I was sharing with her all that I want to do, and she came up with the name. She's like, "Well, why don't you call it Seeds?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, like, what can we do for an acronym?" And so we worked away on the acronym too, and I just feel like it's a very good launching point of understanding that we are all seeds, really. But especially for these young women who have gone through so much trauma, and they've just been covered in darkness and in manure and in just dirt, right? But out of that, they are that seed that begins to sprout given the right conditions. And so that's what we hope to do, is to give them those right conditions so that they can with God turn that manure into fertilizer, and that it can be like the impetus for what they do with their lives going forward. Because I come from a place of incredible privilege. I am very aware of that. And as like we'll talk about a little bit too, but one of the things that I came to grips with was like, who am I to be thinking that I can help them? Right? I don't know anything about their trauma. I don't know anything. I've never experienced anything like that. And I spoke with a mutual friend of ours, John Castles, and he shared with me, Laura, like, you're actually the perfect person to be helping these girls, because all they've known is a really bad normal up until now. And you can actually share that there's a good normal, because their normal is normal, right? Whether it's bad or good, everybody's normal is what we know. But if all they've ever known is something really, really bad, then you can come along and say, you know what? I never experienced that. Like, there is possibilities that your kids will never have to experience what you've experienced, and you can raise them in a good normal, that kind of thing. So a lot of struggles all the way along.
That's amazing. Yeah. So walk me through then, like, can you walk me through an individual, a young girl, like walk me through the process of what happens, how she, this holistic approach to restoration, the long-term solution, so people know, like, when they support SEEDS or what you do, by just maybe giving an example of one woman, and then walk me through what the process is.
Sure. So ideally, we did a soft launch last summer for our home. And again, that was a whole process of me not really being ready and doing it anyways, and learning. And but to give you an example, because that's sort of my frame of reference now of what we do. So like the young woman comes and lives at the house, and she is, goodness, we do everything with her, from taking her to dentist appointments, to helping with medical appointments, to setting up counseling, setting up therapy, those kind of things. And then there's life skills. Oftentimes these girls have left home at 12. Like, the average age of being drawn
Oh,
into human trafficking is 12 to 14. So what does a 12-year-old know about life, about making a good life for themselves, right? Like, I think about how much I learned between the ages of 16 to 18, to be honest, about everything, so much. And here the child is leaving the house at the age of 12 and trying to make it out on their own. And so they could be raised in group homes, they could be raised in homes, like, and just escaping out of the window at night to go be trafficked, and then they come back and then they go to school, and like the stories are so different, so horrific. Like, it was so beyond my level of understanding. Do you know what I mean? Like, being raised in the church, you're just thinking everybody's happy and whatever, like you, right? And so this has been very, very eye-opening. And at the same time, these are the people that Jesus dealt with regularly, like Mary Magdalene, right? And when he went to her and what he did for her. And there are so many other people that Jesus went to. And so that's a big part of how we started, was me going to these girls, not bringing them to us initially, but going to them and meeting with them where they're at in the communities, and hearing a bit of their stories. To be honest, I don't know the full stories of probably, well, except for one, like most of my girls, because it comes out in bits and pieces, and that's not really my place to hear their whole story. If they want to share it, I'm willing to listen. But typically, that's just not something that they speak about, because it was so bad. And anyway, so
and the
we
trauma.
go out.
I mean, they're dealing with their trauma, right?
Yes, exactly. And I'm not necessarily equipped to deal with that kind of, like, I can listen, and I do believe that God has given me a gift of being able to listen. But then it's, what do I do with that to help them go forward? So it's been, it's been an interesting journey, and helping these women move from sort of that seed place to becoming a seedling, to becoming like, building up and becoming that firmer stalk, if you would, of the plant, and then to the point of producing fruit. I don't know that I would say that, I shouldn't say that, definitely, but not many of the girls are at the point of producing fruit yet. You know what I mean? But they are definitely well on their way towards a place of healing, which has been beautiful to see, to be honest. I could tell you stories, but.
Yeah. So they come to this home. So where is the home?
The home is located in Brant County. It is a private location, just to keep it safe for them. And so then when we bring volunteers in, it will be more for the program part of what we do. And the program takes place at Grace Bible Church in Cambridge, downtown Cambridge. And that is just, we rent a room within the church, and it's more like a simple place for volunteers to come, because it's secure, like it's a locked building, right? And so you have to be buzzed in kind of thing during the week. And so it's secure for the girls to feel safe. And trying to think what else.
Well, I love this because, I'm looking on your, the website and reading more about Seeds, and it's, this new story for sex trafficking survivors, a program that is a holistic approach to restoration. It's a long-term solution, for 18 plus survivors of sex trafficking and or exploitation. And it's helping women to start anew, to change their stories, and to live whole, independent lives. That's so empowering to hear. The holistic approach, long-term solutions, there's a lot of, what I like is that you're going to them, but you're also giving them power to make choices and to decide and to learn skills. It's not like you're just sort of giving it all to them, and then, but it's like, no, we're going to teach them and train them
Right.
and work with them, right? So they can produce fruit, like
Right.
seedlings, fruit, right? Like
Yes,
that's
exactly.
so empowering. Like for anybody, any traumatic situation and any growth or, process, that's so good because it kind of gives them back choice to make
Sure.
healthy choices for themselves. And it's not going to be perfect. And, I've heard some
No.
stories where, they don't always make, like us, we don't always make the best choices for ourselves, right? Like,
Right.
so we kind of
Exactly.
keep going. But
Yes.
I want like women to start anew, to change their stories and to live whole, independent lives. I love that, to change their stories. I like that you added that in, like, because I think sometimes, women, I mean, all people can get branded, or people assume their story will be the same, or that their title will be the same, or what they do will always be who they are. But
Right.
what you say here is so like, it really is. I love the growth analogy where it's, you're not staying in the ground covered with manure, but there is life
Yes.
and possibility of blooming and flowers and things.
Right.
Talk to me
Right.
about that. I love that, women, to change their stories. And I think that's just so encouraging.
Yeah. It is a process.
Yeah.
As you know, like a long-term solution, that's what we hope to give them. So that the women who come to our home would be there for up to a year, from 9 months to a year. But within that, we hope to give them the tools so that they can move forward in their life, making like we said, not perfect decisions, but better decisions. So they'll
Mm-hmm.
go through classes on what healthy relationships look like, and boundaries. Like boundaries is such a big misunderstanding for them, because they think that they're being negative if they say, no, I'm not going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's keeping them safe and keeping them with an element of autonomy, and being able to decide for themselves who gets to say what about what happens to them,
Right.
and those kind of things. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a process of where the girls go from when they start. So I've been working with one particular survivor since 2016. It
Hmm.
has been an up and down journey and all over the place. But the amazing thing is, like, just I was with her just yesterday, and just seeing how far she's come in that
Wow.
time has been unbelievable. Like, she is still going through a lot of junk,
Mm-hmm.
but her peace and her desire to follow God in the midst of all of that, it just honestly, it blows me away, because I think, oh, it's hard enough for me to live, in God's will and feel like I'm doing what God wants me to do in my idyllic life. Let alone with somebody who literally gets junk thrown at them, not daily, but weekly or monthly, to try to throw them into a spin of chaos. That's one thing that I've noticed with survivors in particular, is their life is filled with chaos at the beginning. And so what we try to come in and show and to demonstrate is more peace, and to be
Right.
settled. So this survivor, she's way there. She is definitely in a place of peace in the midst of storms still. And then I've got another young survivor. It's been 2.5 years since I've been working with her. And even a year ago, she's so different now than she was a year ago. I was talking about, wanting to be baptized and wanting to dedicate her children in
Amazing.
church. It really is amazing. And when I think about how she would just, go off and leave her kids a year ago with a drug dealer or somebody, I'm like, okay, this is a lot of change in a year. And so that's been the
Yeah.
privilege that I have when I walk with them longer term, because I really do see the benefit of those changes. I know that it's not everybody's thing. Some people just want to jump in, and they just want to help for, a month or 2 or 3. And then they're done, they're on to their next thing. But what I feel God has called me to is that longevity, and is that walking out relationships with them. And I think a big part of my desire to do that is having had a mentor in my life for 25 years, somebody who has walked with me weekly and, kept me on, tries to keep me on the straight and narrow, and just encourages me and all of that. So that is where I believe that's where my desire to walk long term with these girls comes from. And so, yeah, it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take some time. And so that's where the journey for a new life comes from.
Laura, I love that, because in a culture now where everything's quick fix, make it happen fast. Things are fast, and we want to see fast results. Man, we need to be reminded, like what you're saying, about long-term, faithful, steady relationship and care. Whether it's your mentor for 25 years, whether you're 5 years with women, I think we need to remind people. I think this is good for me to hear, because I like to be like, all right, jump in, do it, let's go. Now, gifting-wise, there are people that are like, they're church planters, they're the planters, they're the the starters, and then you've got the people who are, people who maintain, and they're like the long term. So gifting wise, I hear that. However, I think for all of us, there is a call about investment, long term, loving long term, the distance, the race. Like, all of these things are really, really important. And whether it's in your own family, whether it's with survivors, whether it's with a mission or vision. And sometimes, there are times where after the long time, God kind of releases you and lets you go. But there's just something that I'm glad you said that there is in the long term, and it's hard work doing the long term a lot of the times, And so I think that's such a good reminder. We could talk forever, but I need to just wrap up on a few things. Number one, how can people find out more about Seeds and the work you're doing and to support you?
Sure. Just check out our website. It's www.seedscanada.org. And that's probably the best way.
Like, what are your greatest needs?
Our greatest needs. Good question. So right now we're still lacking a couple things for the house, not too many, but there's a couple of beds that we're still looking for, twin beds. And, but for the most part, I think we're good. At this point, we really need staff. So if anyone knows of any amazing people for staffing, we will post links to that from our website. So you can check that out better there.
Okay,
the volunteers
so
on day 2.
seedscanada.org.
Yes.
Okay, and seedscanada.org.
Yes.
Is how we can reach you.
Yes. Great.
Okay, great. Now, last thing, Laura, just your encouragement to women who are struggling with, can I make a difference in the world? Is it too late for me? I'm not equipped. I don't know. Or are afraid, like, oh my goodness, this has been my life and I always thought this was going to be my life, and I feel God is calling me, or kind of like dropping the eggs to something, and I'm terrified. Terrified, but I think I'm supposed to. What would you say to that woman? How would you encourage her today in that?
I'd say try to remember what God has brought you through. Because I think when we look back and we think about what God has brought you through, we've seen that He's been faithful, and we can see what He can bring us through in the future. And so I think a big part of our success going forward with God depends on, especially at our age, is really depending on our looking back and saying, okay, God, and taking stock, like really taking stock of, what has God led me through? What hard things has God brought me through? Oh, this is scary coming up. This is unknown. I'm not so sure about whatever God has for me coming up. But he's been faithful so far that I'm gonna take that next step of faith with him because he has been faithful this far. That would be sort of
Oh,
my encouragement, if you will. Yes, because it could be very scary. Like I said, I had no idea what I was doing when I took my first step of faith. I'd never heard of the issue, let alone met anyone who had been trafficked. And
right.
so taking those steps, and then even last summer doing our soft launch, taking those steps and just relying on God, it is so rewarding. It really is. I can't tell you enough about how amazing the discovery of more of God when we take those initial steps of faith.
Amazing. Well, Laura Ross, so super proud of you for, doing this, for listening to God, doing the research, connecting with people, and doing the hard work, which I totally is so out of your comfort zone, which is even kind of out of your skills of what you can do. And yet here
Yes.
God is leading. And so really proud of you. I'm thankful for that doctor who
Right.
shared about that with your husband. It's like,
Oh,
I don't even
yeah.
know how to get my head around that theologically or
No.
whatever, because it's like, okay,
Yeah.
what, sure. But I mean, I'm just trying to think of a doctor coming in and then sharing something. But thank you, doctor, for
Right?
mentioning that, because that could have
Yep.
brought you on this whole, journey. And, we'll be praying for the work you do and the
Thank you.
survivors and, you know, the women who are being trafficked in Canada, and that more of us would step forward and help and speak up against and
Yeah.
support seeds in the work that you're doing, because I think it's really beautiful, this holistic approach and long-term solution that you're doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for coming on the podcast, because I know this isn't your natural thing to do, but you did an amazing job, and again, doing something brave and going through it even when, it's not your thing. But again, Laura, just showing and demonstrating, when women step forward with courage to share their story, to share what God is doing, it impacts in so many ripples to so many. So I know that your story has encouraged people who are listening, and I'm just so thankful for you and your friendship with me. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for reaching out and for pushing me into this. I appreciate it. And I have to trust that God's going to use this too, this stumbling forward that I'm doing. But I appreciate you, and it's always easier to do it when you've got an amazing host. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Lauren. To our viewers and listeners, to you, as you stumble forward, as you're freaking out about the next step that God has for you, know that God is with you to do hard and courageous things. And know as you go that you are seen, you are heard, and you are deeply loved by God. Thank you so much for joining us.